For years, Officer Brady Knox believed a badge gave him the right to decide who belonged and who didn't. He saw Elijah Grant, a quiet older black man buying groceries, and assumed compliance. He expected fear. He expected silence. But he was wrong. Because when they chose Elijah, they didn't know who they were messing with. They didn't know he was a retired Army colonel, a decorated combat leader who had faced death in 3 wars and never flinched. And in the middle of that store, with a gun pointed at his chest and a crowd frozen in disbelief, Elijah didn't back down. What came next wasn't just justice. It was a reckoning that rippled through the nation. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one man. It's about all of us. Sunlight streamed through the supermarket's tall glass windows, casting pale gold across polished tiles. Shoppers stood motionless between aisles of cereal and canned beans. Somewhere near the frozen foods, a child's cry had just faded. And the silence that followed was the kind that comes before everything changes. It was just another bright Saturday morning when Colonel Elijah Grant pulled into the lot of a suburban grocery store, his mind on oranges and a fresh loaf of rye. A tall black man in his late 60s, he moved with quiet confidence, the kind carved from decades of military service and a soul tested by darker battles. He wore a simple coat and scuffed boots, nothing that shouted rank, but even in plain clothes, Elijah carried a presence that made people pause. Just as he reached for a cart, something tugged at his attention. Near the sliding doors, a teenage boy, black, maybe 16, was being questioned by a store's security guard. The kid held a white plastic bag stamped with the store's logo. His hair was messy, his voice cracked with panic. "I forgot the receipt. I swear I paid." The guard, a pale man with a square jaw, didn't budge. His posture was tight, hand near his walkie-talkie, eyes locked like a predator, unsure if it should pounce. Elijah watched, unmoving, not because he didn't care, but because he had seen this script before, too many times. A young black face mistaken for trouble, a misunderstanding spiraling into something irreversible. He could have looked away, just shopped, paid, and gone home. After all, hadn't he earned the right to rest? Instead, he stepped forward. "Sir," Elijah said, voice calm but weighty. "Perhaps this is just a misunderstanding." He stood between them, not as a shield but as a statement. The guard's eyes flickered, scanning Elijah's face, unsure whether to double down or step back. "We've had theft this morning," he muttered. "The kid fits the pattern." Elijah didn't argue. He asked the boy which register he used, then described the cashier's appearance with startling precision. "You see, he remembers. Let's check with the cashier." For a moment, there was silence, a pause where the tension could go either way. Then reluctantly the guard relented. The boy exhaled and hurried inside. Elijah remained still, watching the boy disappear down the aisle. Why had he intervened? Maybe it was the boy's trembling hands. Or maybe it was remembering the first time someone looked at him like that, like a thread in his own skin. Have you ever stepped in when silence felt safer? Sometimes, the smallest act of presence becomes the loudest refusal to accept injustice. Inside the store, Elijah Grant moved with quiet intent, pushing his cart past the apples and canned beans. The moment with the boy had passed, but something inside him hadn't settled. A familiar hum of tension pressed against his ribs, the kind soldiers know well, the kind that says, "Eyes are watching." Near the bottled water aisle, he felt it, a stare. He glanced sideways, just enough to spot the source, a police officer leaning against a pillar, young, clean-shaven, jaws sharp. His eyes didn't scan the crowd like a man on duty. They fixed squarely on Elijah, cold and certain. It wasn't interest, it was prejudgment. Elijah kept walking, heartbeat steady. He had learned long ago not to flinch. But as he moved toward checkout, the officer followed, slow and deliberate. "Where are you headed?" the cop asked, his voice clipped. Elijah turned, holding his receipt calmly between two fingers. Just paid for my groceries, heading to my car. The officer took the slip, squinted at it, then narrowed his eyes. Southside address? That's right. The pause dragged. The officer wasn't checking facts, he was searching for doubt. Then came the shift. The officer stepped closer. You fit a description. There's been theft here, more than once. Elijah tilted his head slightly. Are you accusing me, or are you afraid of how I look? That question landed heavy. Around them, shoppers slowed. Some pretended to browse, others simply stared. Elijah didn't raise his voice. He didn't plead. He stood firm, not as a man defending himself, but as someone defending what should have been obvious. He didn't reach for anything. Didn't move too fast. The rules were unspoken, but written into every black man's muscle memory. Can you imagine knowing that your survival depends not on your innocence, but on how calm you remain in the face of suspicion? For Elijah, this wasn't confrontation, it was resistance, the kind that refuses to bow, even when it feels the weight of a badge pressing down like a loaded weapon. The officer's name was Brady Knox. He circled Elijah Grant like a lion eyeing its prey. Not rushing, just closing in. Elijah remained near the exit, his receipt still visible, grocery bag in hand. But Knox wasn't interested in documentation. He wanted domination. There's a delay in the system, Knox said. Your payment hasn't posted. Technically, you haven't paid. Elijah blinked, measured. The receipt shows it processed. Knox folded his arms. That's not up to me. I have a right to detain anyone who fits a profile. Elijah didn't raise his voice. He pointed toward the cashier. You can ask her. She rang me up. But the cashier, a young woman with glasses and nervous fingers, glanced up, saw Knox, then dropped her gaze to the register, saying nothing. That silence hit harder than any accusation. Fear, Elijah thought. Or maybe resignation. Then Knox took a step closer and said something Elijah had heard before. You match the description. 6 feet tall, older, black male. That word, match, wasn't evidence, it was excuse. Elijah didn't flinch. So, you're saying I'm guilty because I exist? Knox's hand hovered near his holster. And then, it happened. With a motion as smooth as it was chilling, the officer pulled out his gun and aimed it directly at Elijah's chest. The store froze. A mother nearby clutched her son. The boy, no older than 6, stared at the gun, then screamed and wet himself, a puddle forming on the tile. Elijah didn't move, didn't breathe. He looked at that gun not with fear but with something far more dangerous to men like Knox. Dignity. Have you ever stood so still, so certain, that even a weapon lost its power? In that moment, it was no longer about groceries. It was about what it meant to be black, honorable, and unarmed in a country where suspicion could cock a trigger faster than truth could speak. The silence in the store was deafening. A loaded gun pointed at a man with gray at his temples, a grocery bag in one hand and a receipt in the other. For a moment, no one moved. Then came a voice, not loud, but steady. Here, someone called from the spice aisle. I know that cop. All heads turned. It was a young employee named Marcus, brown-skinned, early 30s, holding a box of cereal he'd forgotten to shelve. He stepped forward slowly, voice trembling but firm. Your name's Brady Knox, right? Knox's jaw tensed. I remember you, Marcus continued. You dragged a kid off a school bus back when I was 14, Drew Franklin. He cried all the way home, had a busted lip and a broken wrist. Said he fit the description too. Knox's face flushed. His grip on the gun didn't loosen, but his certainty did. The crowd stirred. Phones came out. People started filming. One of them, an older white woman in a red coat, Evelyn her name tag read, lifted her phone without saying a word. She held it steady, her eyes locked on Knox like someone seeing clearly for the first time. Another voice spoke, an elderly man near the bread display. "I saw him pay," he said, "clear as day." A murmur passed through the store like wind before a storm. It wasn't just one man standing now. It was a ripple of memory, of reckoning. Elijah never moved. He didn't ask for help, but help had come. Have you ever seen silence break because someone finally found the courage to speak? It was no longer Elijah's word against a badge. It was dozens of voices, witnesses, who had always watched injustice quietly. Until now. And with every new phone raised, every whisper turned into truth, Knox's authority began to crack under the weight of collective memory. Just when it seemed the moment would collapse into violence, another door opened. 3 figures stepped into the supermarket. 2 wore crisp military police uniforms. Between them walked a tall man in a dark blue suit, hair silver, expression carved from stone. His name tag read, Darian Cole, Department of Defense. Without hesitation, Cole strode straight toward Elijah and the armed officer, still holding a loaded gun. The tension cracked like glass. "That man," Cole said, his voice sharp as command steel, "is Colonel Elijah Grant, U.S. Army retired, 35 years of service, 3 tours, Distinguished Service Cross." The weight of truth slammed down. Brady Knox's weapon didn't fall, but it trembled. "You're making a grave mistake," Cole added, eyes locked on Knox. In that instant, the room shifted. Power moved like a current, away from the trembling hand and toward the man who hadn't flinched. Behind Cole, one of the military police stepped forward and spoke into a secure radio. Confirming identity, civilian witness verified. DOD authenticated. Knox swallowed, the gun lowered inch by inch. Then Ellen's voice broke the silence. "The world is watching, officer. Don't make this the day you're remembered for pulling a trigger on a hero." A pause, long and aching. And then, Knox's hand dropped to his side, the weapon clicked into its holster. It wasn't relief that filled the store. It was a breath held too long, finally exhaled. Have you ever witnessed dignity overpower a drawn gun? Elijah didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded at Cole and looked around. Not as a victim, but as a man who had just reminded an entire room what leadership truly means. Not by force, not by shouting, but by standing and refusing to step back. The footage of Elijah Grant standing before a drawn gun rippled across the country like a stone dropped into still water. By nightfall, millions had seen it. His calm face, the trembling officer, and the silent crowd transformed into a wave of awakening. News anchors called it the moment dignity stared down injustice. But for Elijah, it wasn't a moment. It was a reckoning. 3 days later, Officer Brady Knox was indicted on charges of abuse of authority and reckless endangerment. His badge was stripped. His name became a cautionary tale. But the deeper shock came from within the system itself. Internal investigators uncovered that the store's surveillance footage, conveniently missing, had been deleted by Knox's precinct. A cover-up, a pattern. Then came the hearings. Stories poured out. Young men, women, elders, all echoing one another. They said I matched a description. They never listened when I spoke. They looked through me, not at me. And amid it all, Elijah did something no one expected. He declined every interview, turned down every spotlight. Instead, he showed up in a modest community center with folding chairs and a dusty chalkboard. His new mission? Teaching young people of color how to survive, speak up, and stay grounded in their rights. He called the program Stand Ready. Not a protest, not a campaign, a preparation. Can you imagine choosing to give back when all the world wants to turn you into a symbol? In quiet rooms across the country, Elijah's story wasn't retold as a spectacle, but as a lesson that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands, and when it does, firm, unyielding. It leaves behind not just justice, but a path for others to walk beside it. Elijah Grant never wanted to be a hero, but in refusing to kneel, he helped an entire generation rise. The heart of Elijah Grant's story reminds us that dignity does not need to shout, it only needs to stand. In a world where loud voices and quick judgments often drown out quiet strength, his calm refusal to bow to injustice speaks louder than anger ever could. Many of us, especially with age, have known moments where silence felt safer. We've watched, waited, and hoped someone else would speak up. But sometimes, all it takes is one steady presence to shift the tide. Not with power, but with purpose. Elijah didn't fight back with fists. He held his ground with truth, with patience, and with the kind of grace that only time and hardship can teach. And in doing so, he showed others, young and old, that there is still room for honor in the face of fear. Maybe we won't all stand in a grocery store under threat, but we each have chances, in quiet ways, to uphold what's right, to speak gently when it matters, to protect the vulnerable, to remember that justice begins with how we choose to see each other. Because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply not step aside. Long after the crowd dispersed and the camera stopped rolling, Elijah Grant sat alone on a wooden bench outside the store. The morning sun warmed his shoulders, and in his lap, the receipt, crumpled but intact, rested like a quiet badge of endurance. There were no cheers, no headlines in that moment, just the stillness of a man who had faced down a weapon without raising one of his own. That is the quiet power we often forget, surviving with dignity, refusing to be erased. In the weeks that followed, the community began to heal, but not by forgetting. A formal investigation was launched. Reforms were introduced. Testimonies, once silenced, found their way into the open. And at the heart of it all stood Elijah, not as a symbol, but as a reminder that justice, when grounded in truth, can still take root. If this story stayed with you, share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism so these voices don't fade into silence. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.